Okay, get ready for a deep dive, everybody, because today we're tackling some seriously fascinating metabolic mysteries. We're talking about those tiny enzyme deficiencies that, believe it or not, can really throw a wrench into the whole human machine. You guys clearly get this stuff. You've sent us some amazing notes on this, so let's get into it.
You're right. It's incredible how such small changes at the molecular level can cascade into these major health challenges. The human body is a finely tuned machine, that's for sure, and these disorders really drive that point home.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Our first case throws the body's entire energy system out of whack. Lactic acidosis. I mean, we all know lactic acid builds up after a tough workout, but this is a whole other beast, right?
You got it. We're talking about pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency. Basically, the enzyme that connects glucose breakdown to energy production, it's malfunctioning. Imagine a bridge being out on a major highway. Traffic's got to find a detour, which is way less efficient, and you get those backups and delays. In this case, that detour links to a buildup of lactic acid, and the body just can't produce energy effectively.
And that detour, that metabolic backroad, it leaves some clues, right? Like what's with this increased serum alanine we see in these cases?
That's a great catch. It's not just some random molecule floating around. Alanine is an amino acid, and it gets overproduced when the body has to rely on that inefficient energy pathway we talked about. It's a signal to doctors, like a flashing red light, that something is off with how the body is processing glucose.
So if you're a doctor dealing with this, how do you even start to treat it? Do you try to like reroute the energy traffic altogether?
In a way, yeah. Sometimes we see improvements with supplements that give those remaining enzymes a boost. But what's really fascinating here is the ketogenic diet.
Wait, keto, hold up, that's high-fat, low-carb, Brad. We're talking about a glucose problem. Doesn't that seem counterintuitive?
That's the beauty of it. Keto basically forces the body to use ketones for fuel instead of glucose. It's like bypassing that broken down highway altogether.
Whoa, that's incredible. Okay, switching gears here. Next up is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. This one's all about oxidative stress, which always sounds to me like, I don't know, rusting from the inside out.
Perfect analogy. Our cells have this defense system against that rust, a molecule called NADPH, and this particular enzyme, guess what? It's key to producing it.
Let me guess. Glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase.
Bingo. And when it's deficient, we really see the impact on red blood cells. They're super vulnerable to this oxidative damage, and it can lead to hemolytic anemia, which means that the red blood cells are breaking down faster than they should.
Okay, so far so good. Now, this is where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit strange. Fava beans and sulfa drugs. Why those two?
So both of those, they contain compounds that actually ramp up oxidative stress. Most people, they can handle it no problem, but for someone with this deficiency, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. It can be the difference between a normal day and a serious health crisis.
It really makes you appreciate how crucial it is to treat each person individually, doesn't it? All right, ready to shift gears again. We're moving from energy to something totally different now. The body's building blocks. And I'm realizing now, collagen, it's way more than just wrinkles, huh?
You got it.
Collagen is like the scaffolding that holds our entire body together, literally. It's in our tendons, our ligaments, even our eyeballs. And there are different types of collagen, each with a specific job to do. So when you have a defect in one type, it can cause a whole range of problems, like Ehler's Danlos syndrome, right? And get this, there are different types of this disorder too.
Absolutely. And they really show you just how many roles collagen plays in the body. Take the classic type, for example. It often causes hypermobile joints, which sounds kind of cool, right? You're super flexible. But the downside is chronic pain, and you're way more prone to injuries.
So maybe not the best thing for that aspiring contortionist out there.
Right. Then you've got the vascular type, which affects the collagen in blood vessels. Now, this one's serious. We're talking weakened blood vessels that could rupture life-threatening stuff.
Wow, it's mind-blowing how one protein can be behind such different conditions.
It really speaks to how intricate our biology is. Then you have osteogenesis imperfecta, what we call brittle bone disease. In this case, the defect is in type 1 collagen, which is crucial for strong bones.
And this one's often genetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Autosomal dominant inheritance, right?
Exactly. So if one parent has the gene, there's a 50-50 chance their child will inherit it. And even inheriting just one copy can lead to the disorder. People with this, they often have frequent fractures, even from minor bumps and falls.
And then there's that blue sclera, which I always thought was fascinating. Why would a bone disorder change someone's eye color?
Because remember, collagen isn't just in bones, it's also part of the sclera, the white of your eye.
Hmm.
So with osteogenesis imperfecta, that faulty collagen structure, it actually affects how light scatters in the eye, giving the sclera a bluish tint.
So it's true, what they say, the eyes are the windows to the soul, or at least to our collagen. Okay, let's move on from structural issues to what happens when the metabolic processes themselves go off the rails. And this next one, it's tough to talk about, Lesch-Nyhan Syndrome.
Yeah, it really shows you how connected the body and mind truly are. This disorder tragically leads to self-harming behaviors, and it all stems from just one single enzyme deficiency.
I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around that. How could a missing enzyme lead to such a severe behavioral issue?
It's like a domino effect. So the problem is a deficiency in the enzyme hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosyltransferase transferase. Long name, I know. We just call it HPRT. But without HPRT, the body can't recycle certain molecules, purines, properly, and this leads to a buildup of uric acid, which is a waste product.
So like gout, but way more intense.
Exactly. But in Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, that uric acid buildup doesn't just affect the joints, it goes straight for the brain. And that's what leads to those self-harming behaviors.
And there's also that really striking visual, red or orange crystals in the urine.
That's right, and it's a direct result of all that excess uric acid. It's
Yeah.
a pretty stark reminder of all the chaos happening on the inside.
That's rough. Okay, moving on to alkaptonuria.
Ah, yes. The black urine disorder. Talk about a memorable symptom, right?
Black urine, you're not kidding, are you?
Nope, not at all. So with alkaptonuria, it's a deficiency in the enzyme homogentisate oxidase. Without it, this substance called homogentisic acid builds up. And when that stuff comes into contact with air, boom, it oxidizes and turns black.
Okay, so that's the why behind the unique symptom. But besides the shock value, is that buildup actually harmful?
It can be. Over time, that homogentisic acid can actually start to deposit in the joints. This can lead to a type of arthritis that people often mistake for osteoarthritis.
Wow, so a seemingly harmless color change can be a sign of something much bigger going on.
You got it. Which is why early diagnosis is so important. And speaking of early diagnosis, the next one we're going to talk about, phenylketonuria, or PKU, is a perfect example of why those newborn screenings are so crucial.
Oh, yeah. I remember PKU from those newborn screening tests.
Most people do. PKU is all about the enzyme phenylalanine hydroxylase. Now, this enzyme's job is to convert phenylalanine, which is an essential amino acid, into another one called tyrosine. But without enough of the enzyme, phenylalanine builds up, and it can actually become toxic, especially for a developing brain.
Which is why catching it early is so important.
Exactly. If it's not treated, PKU can lead to intellectual disabilities and a whole host of other problems. But here's the good news. If we catch it early, babies with PKU can live totally healthy lives with a special diet that's low in phenylalanine.
It's amazing what a difference early intervention can make. Okay, you ready for a little body image twist in our metabolic mystery tour?
Let's do it. This next one really goes to show that looks can be deceiving, especially in the world of genetics. We're talking Marfan syndrome and homocystinuria.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Both of these conditions can cause a pretty similar physical appearance. We're talking tall stature, long limbs, slender fingers. Doctors call it Marfanoid habitus. But here's the thing. The root causes are totally different.
So same look, different culprits. Let's start with Marfan syndrome. What's the story there?
Marfan syndrome is a genetic disorder, and it affects a protein called fibrillin-1, which is super important for connective tissue. Think of it as the scaffolding that provides structure and support throughout the body.
So with Marfan, that scaffolding is faulty.
You got it. And that can have serious consequences, especially for the aorta, the main artery coming from the heart. In Marfan syndrome, the aorta can weaken and get bigger, and that increases the risk of it rupturing, which is life-threatening.
Yikes, that sounds terrifying.
It is, which is why it's so important for people with Marfan syndrome to get regular checkups. Okay, so that was Marfan, a connective tissue problem. What about homocystinuria? You said same look, different cause. You got it. Homocystinuria is a metabolic disorder, and it's often caused by a deficiency in an enzyme called cystathionine beta synthase. Try saying that 3 times fast.
I think I'll stick with homocystinuria. But, okay, so what does this enzyme do?
It's involved in the metabolism of an amino acid called methionine. And here's where it gets really interesting. This enzyme needs vitamin B6 to function properly.
Vitamin B6, like the stuff in breakfast cereal.
That's the one. So if you don't have enough B6, this enzyme can't do its job, and you get a buildup of something called homocysteine in the blood.
And high homocysteine. Not good.
Not good at all. It's linked to blood clots, heart disease, and yep, you guessed it, those skeletal abnormalities that look a lot like Marfan syndrome. So we've got two completely different paths leading to a very similar outcome.
That's incredible. So how in the world do doctors tell these two conditions apart then?
There are a few subtle clues. For instance, both can cause lens dislocation in the eye. But get this, the dislocation happens in opposite directions depending on which condition you have.
No way. The direction of a dislocated lens can actually be a clue.
You bet. It just goes to show you, sometimes the tiniest details can make all the difference in diagnosis.
You've given us a lot to digest already, but we're not done yet. There are even more metabolic mysteries to uncover when we come back. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm ready to dive even deeper into these metabolic mysteries. What other fascinating cases do we have lined up?
Okay, so we've talked a lot about collagen already, but there's another connective tissue disorder I think you'll find really interesting. It's called Stickler syndrome.
Stickler syndrome. Okay. I'm not familiar with that one. What is it?
So, like Marfan syndrome, Stickler syndrome also involves problems with collagen production. Specifically, it affects collagen type 2. But Stickler syndrome, it kind of has its own unique way of showing up. It mainly affects the eyes, the ears, and the joints.
Eyes, ears, and joints. That's a pretty random combination. How does messed up collagen affect all three of those?
Well, it all comes down to collagen's job as a structural protein. Like in the eyes, for example, collagen type 2, it's crucial for the vitreous humor, that gel-like substance that helps maintain the eye's shape.
Right, it's like the jelly that keeps the eyeball from collapsing in on itself.
Exactly. But with Stickler syndrome, that vitreous humor, it can be a lot thinner than it should be, or it might not form correctly at all. And that can lead to, you guessed it, a bunch of vision problems, including retinal detachment.
Oh, wow, that's scary. So that's the eyes. What about the ears? Where does collagen come in there?
So collagen type 2, it's also a really important part of those tiny little bones in your middle ear, you know, the ones that vibrate and help transmit sound to the inner ear.
Right, right.
Well, in Stickler syndrome, those bones, they can be malformed because of the faulty collagen, and that, of course, leads to hearing loss.
So you've got potential vision problems, hearing loss.
Yeah.
And you said joints were affected too, right? What's going on there?
Well, remember how we talked about collagen being a major component of cartilage?
Right, the stuff that cushions our joints.
Bingo. So in Stickler syndrome, that faulty collagen, it can actually lead to osteoarthritis. And we're not talking about just your typical wear and tear osteoarthritis that you might see later in life. People with Stickler syndrome, they can develop it really early, even in childhood.
It's crazy how one little collagen defect can cause so many problems in completely different parts of the body.
It really goes to show you just how interconnected everything is and how even the smallest changes at the molecular level can have these huge ripple effects throughout the entire body.
Absolutely. Okay, what else is on our metabolic mystery tour today? Ready to switch gears again?
Always. This time we're going from connective tissue to those cellular recycling centers we touched on earlier. Lysosomes, remember those?
Lysosomes, right. They're like the garbage disposals of our cells breaking down all the waste products.
Perfect analogy. And let me tell you, when those garbage disposals break down, things can get messy fast. That's where we get into a group of disorders called lysosomal storage diseases, or LSDs for short.
LSDs. Well, that's a bit of an unfortunate acronym.
Oh, no, right? But don't let the name fool you. These disorders are incredibly complex and, unfortunately, often really serious.
Okay, so walk me through it. What actually happens when these cellular recycling centers go offline?
So basically, certain enzymes inside the lysosomes, they either go missing or they stop working properly. And remember how we said each enzyme has a very specific job? Like one enzyme breaks down one very specific type of waste product?
Yeah.
Well, when you have an enzyme deficiency in a lysosome, those specific waste products that it's supposed to break down, they start piling up.
So instead of the garbage getting taken out, it just keeps accumulating.
Precisely. And over time, that buildup, it becomes toxic. It can damage cells and tissues throughout the entire body. And get this, There are over 50 different types of LSDs. Each one has a different enzyme deficiency, which means a different buildup of substances and a whole different set of symptoms.
Over 50. Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and it makes diagnosing them really tricky because the symptoms can be all over the place. They can mimic other, more common conditions. It's like trying to solve a medical mystery with 50 different suspects.
That's a tough one. But I imagine it's super important to figure out which LSD it is, right? So you can treat it properly.
You got it. Understanding these disorders is crucial because if we can diagnose them early, it can make a world of difference in managing the symptoms and giving people a better quality of life.
So with so many potential LSDs, is there like a classic example you can give us, something that illustrates how diverse these disorders can be?
Sure, there are a few that really stand out. One is Tay-Sachs disease, which you might have heard of.
Oh yeah, K-sex. It's a really sad one. It usually affects babies and young children, right?
Unfortunately, yes, it's a very serious genetic disorder. Basically, the enzyme that's missing in Tay-Sachs, it's called hexasaminidase A. Now, this enzyme, its job is to break down a fatty substance called GM2 ganglioside. But without that enzyme, that fatty substance, it starts to build up. And the worst part is, it builds up in the brain.
So it affects brain function.
Yeah, it causes a lot of damage to the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. It leads to all sorts of severe neurological problems, and unfortunately, it's often fatal, especially in early childhood.
It's amazing, and by amazing I mean heartbreaking, that just one missing enzyme, this one tiny little piece of the puzzle, can have such a huge impact.
It really does underscore just how precise and balanced everything has to be for our bodies to function properly. Okay, another well-known LSD, this one tends to be a little less severe than Tay-Sachs, is Gaucher disease.
Gaucher disease, okay. What's the missing enzyme in that one?
So in Gaucher disease, the enzyme that's deficient is called glucocerebrosidase. Its job is to break down a specific type of fat called glucocerebroside.
Okay, so I'm sensing a pattern here.
Mhm.
Missing enzyme, buildup of some substance, and then a whole cascade of problems depending on where that buildup is happening.
You got it. You're catching on quick.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. With Gaucher disease, that buildup of glucocerebroside, it mainly affects the spleen, the liver, and the bone marrow.
So totally different from Tay-Sachs, where it was more of a neurological issue. This one, it's like the symptoms could be all over the place, right?
Absolutely. Some people with Gaucher disease, they have problems with their spleen and liver getting enlarged. That can cause a lot of pain and discomfort in the abdomen. Other people might have problems with their bones, bone pain, fractures, even anemia, all because of that glucocerebroside buildup in the bone marrow.
It's fascinating, really, how two disorders that both involve those lysosomes, those cellular recycling centers, can have such completely different symptoms.
It really speaks to the sheer diversity and complexity of these lysosomal storage diseases. Diagnosing them, it often involves a lot of detective work. We're talking a thorough medical history, a physical exam, and usually a bunch of specialized testing to pinpoint exactly which enzyme is causing the problem.
It's like a medical mystery, but instead of searching for clues at a crime scene, you're searching for clues inside the body.
Exactly. And the good news is, with all the advances in genetic testing and enzyme replacement therapies, there's a lot more hope for people and families affected by these disorders.
That's really encouraging to hear. Even with these complex and often very serious conditions, research is making a difference.
Absolutely. And as we continue to learn more and more about how lysosomes work and what happens when they don't, who knows what other breakthroughs are on the horizon?
I'm excited to find out. We've covered some seriously fascinating ground in this act of our metabolic mystery tour. What else do we have in store for our final act?
Fasten your seatbelts because we're diving into even more metabolic marvels in our final act, showcasing how important balance, diversity, and interconnectedness are within the human body. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. We've journeyed through faulty scaffolding, malfunctioning recycling centers. What other surprises does the world of metabolism have up its sleeve?
Get ready for this. Even the most ordinary molecules, the ones we barely even think about, they can really mess things up when their metabolism goes off the rails.
Okay, now you got to give me an example. What seemingly ordinary molecule could cause such extraordinary problems?
Let's talk about creatine.
Creatine. You mean like the supplement that bodybuilders are always talking about?
Yep, that's the one. But it's not just about building muscles. Our bodies, they actually produce creatine naturally. It's a really important player in energy metabolism, especially for those tissues that need a lot of energy, like our muscles and our brains.
It's like a cellular energy drink.
You could say that. Creatine helps those cells, especially in the muscles and brain, store energy and access it quickly when they need it. But when there's a problem with creatine metabolism, those energy-hungry cells, they basically experience a power outage.
And that's where creatine deficiencies come in.
Right.
And it's not just about not having enough creatine, but something being off with how the body processes it.
Exactly. Imagine you've got all the ingredients to bake a cake, but your oven's broken. You can't actually make the cake if you can't combine and bake those ingredients, right? Our bodies, they're the same way. We need specific enzymes to convert creatine into its active form, which is called phosphocreatine. And that phosphocreatine, it's crucial for storing energy and transporting it to where it needs to go in the cell.
So it's like a cellular energy crisis, especially for the muscles and the brain. What kind of impact does that actually have on someone with a creatine deficiency?
Well, the symptoms can be all over the place depending on which enzyme is deficient and how severe the deficiency is. Some people, they have a lot of muscle weakness and fatigue. Just doing everyday things can be a real struggle. Other people, they might have developmental delays, intellectual disabilities. Some even have seizures, especially if the brain is really affected.
It's kind of humbling, isn't it, to think that something as seemingly simple as creatine metabolism could be behind so many different issues. It really highlights how important every single piece of the metabolic puzzle is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And speaking of puzzle pieces, this last disorder we're going to talk about today, it really drives home the point that it's not just about having the right pieces, but also about how those pieces are arranged and how they work together.
Ooh, okay, I love a good puzzle analogy. Lay it on me.
So you know how we've talked about enzymes being super specific, like one enzyme, one specific job, kind of like a lock and key.
Right, you get the wrong enzyme in there, the whole process gets messed up.
Exactly. Well, sometimes it's not even about having the right or wrong enzyme, but about having enough different kinds of enzymes. Like, imagine you're trying to build a house, but all you have is a hammer. You might be able to do a few things, but you're going to run into problems pretty quickly when you need a saw or a screwdriver or a level.
Okay, I see what you mean. We need a diverse toolbox, or in this case, a diverse set of enzymes to keep things running smoothly. What happens when that diversity is lacking?
That's when we get a group of disorders called congenital disorders of glycosylation, or CDGs.
CDGs. Okay, I vaguely remember learning about glycosylation in biology class. It has something to do with attaching sugars to proteins, right? But why is that so important? What do those sugars actually do?
Those sugars, we call them glycans. They're like little tags or modifications that get added to proteins and lipids. And trust me, these tags are essential. They do all sorts of things. They influence how proteins fold, how stable they are. They're involved in cell signaling, immune recognition. The list goes on and on.
Wow, so these glycans are like the stage managers of our cells. They make sure all the actors have the right costumes, they're in the right place at the right time, and they know their lines.
I love that analogy. But with CDGs, that whole process of attaching these glycan tags, it's disrupted. Either the tags are wrong, or they're attached in the wrong places, or they're not attached at all. And because glycosylation is involved in so many cellular processes, the symptoms of CDGs can be incredibly diverse. They can affect multiple organ systems. It can be really tough to pin down.
So we're talking developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, maybe even seizures, movement disorders, problems with specific organs. It could be a whole range of things.
Exactly. CDGs are kind of like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But really, it just goes to show you how vast and complex the human genome is, and how even the tiniest variations in our genetic code can have these huge ripple effects.
It's been an incredible journey, really. We've explored how these often very rare conditions can teach us so much about how the human body works. I mean, the interconnectedness of our metabolic pathways, the delicate balance that we need for everything to run smoothly, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
And we've only just scratched the surface. The field of metabolomics is constantly evolving. There are new discoveries happening all the time. It's a good reminder that we'll never know everything, and with each new thing we learn, it's a chance to appreciate just how amazing and complex life really is.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of metabolic disorders. We hope you've learned something new today. Until next time, keep those brains firing. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of science and discovery.